Good afternoon. I'm Kate Bullard. I'm a project organizer for the Adjunct Action Network. For those of you who are not aware, Adjunct Action is the higher education organizing arm of the Service Employees International Union. The Adjunct Action Network is a member-driven effort to raise standards in higher education and in the teaching profession. Our philosophy is that more people we reach, the more change will affect. Today is part one of the network's organizing boot camp. Thank you for joining us. Our session today, Organizing 101, is being led by Sarah Glick and Sean Barrett, both veteran organizers of the Adjunct Action campaign. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock, we're going to be having a session on legal rights, and on Thursday, we'll have a session on the history and future of the Adjunct Action campaign, and that will also be at 4 o'clock. So, Sarah and Sean, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. So I just wanted to kick off this section of the boot camp by talking about what does it mean to organize. So organizing is about reaching out on an individual basis and on a group basis to your colleagues and finding out from them their story. So it's about having one-on-one conversations, finding out how long they've worked at an institution, what they teach, why they teach, and most importantly, what do they want to see changed. Folks organize because there is something that they want to see changed. And that's what the goal of having these individual organizing conversations or talking to your coworkers is about. Building relationships, they're informal, get to know who you're talking to. They work at the same institution as you, or they may work at a different institution. But find out who they are, why they're there, and most importantly, what it is that they want to see improved in their profession or in higher education or in their department. So that's why we organize. Sean?
Just to reiterate what Sarah says, when you want to start organizing on your campus and you're kind of looking around, you're probably not the only adjunct that feels, that things need to change. That there definitely things could be better at this institution. You could better the higher education experience for your students and for yourself there as an employee of that institution. So as you're looking around, as you want to have conversations with one-on-one, look at the person. You might be a lucky few adjuncts that actually have an office space. Look who's in that office space with you. I mean, I know on a lot of the universities that we have organized on, there'll be what they'll call adjunct row, somewhere deep in the basement where you share a couple of offices, maybe 20 or 30 into a big room. And start having those conversations one-on-one with people who are in there. Ask them, hi, give them your name. How long are you an adjunct? Are you part-time lecturer here? And just open up that dialogue. And if you're unsure, it's really hard to find out who identifies because, one, you really don't want to talk about your own situation and how you feel about this. You're trying to make ends meet on a daily basis. How do I cobble together a living doing what I love, and that's teaching, and that's being a professor in your field. But others feel that same way, so you can just reach out to them. It is about the one-on-one conversation. It is about making that social connection, and then you'll find out that you're not alone in this aspect. There are lots of adjuncts. We're currently doing this work here in the Boston area at Boston University, Bentley, Tufts University, we just organized. Northeastern, they just organized. And it all started out with a small group reaching out one-on-one and having that conversations with each other. Sarah?
Great. Well, let's turn to some of the questions that we had submitted. I know a lot of you sent in questions, and we're going to try to have Sarah and Sean answer them. We're going to start with one that I think is a really good question. How do you overcome adjunct and part-timers' unwillingness to identify themselves as exploited? Because they like to kind of hide how disrespected the position is, that they don't feel comfortable calling themselves adjuncts, for example.
So, I mean, first you have to look in yourself and ask yourself, what motivated you to want to change the situation that you're in? And so for some folks, it helps that they can relate to other people starting from where they're coming from themselves and talking about their story. And like Sean said in the organizing, then they realize that they're not alone. you know, you talk to a couple people and you find that they share similar struggles that you do, whether it's putting food on the table, whether it's having enough time to meet with your students, whether it's trying to get the courses that you want to teach. It's really, again, about going back and getting folks' story. You don't have to come out with those exact words about using the word exploited, because people don't like to feel that they are, but there's ways in the story and in the conversation for that to come out. It could be small injustices in the workplace, or it could be the big ones that you guys are fighting for. Sean, anything else?
No, I mean, you hit right on it.
So how do you get started? I mean, I think at the network we often have people coming to us and saying, I don't even know where to begin.
Well, you know, I mean, one of the first things you do if you're on here right now is, you know, you're part of the Adjunct Action Network, encourage your colleagues or anybody you know. I mean, join the Adjunct Action Network, because that way you'll have access to a lot of resources if there's not, you know, organizers like myself or other organizers like Sarah that you could start to talk to. But then again, it goes back to that conversation. Within your department, I'm sure there's a list somewhere with, like, maybe some people have office, or here's some contact information, some emails. You know, look on your department website, see who might be teaching as an adjunct there, and start gathering that information, you know, and reaching out to people that you might feel are like-minded. It's, you know, you might know somebody who teaches, and you guys, you know, hang out go to the same coffee shop, or your kids are in the same school. You know, I've actually met quite a few adjuncts through my daughter's, her friends at school, in the elementary school, and I live close to a couple colleges, and we've ran into adjuncts that way, and myself. So, I mean, they're around you. You know, start creating a list, and then from that, you know, start talking to them. Sarah?
I think the other thing to remember is all of these campaigns start small. They start with a couple people, so don't feel that you have to talk to a huge amount of people, or that a huge amount of people have to come to a meeting. It really starts with 2, 3, 4, 5 committed folks to move this forward. And the conversations don't have to be formal. They can be over a cup of coffee. They can be in the hallway. They can be in the office. They can be, you know, as you're walking to your car to catch public transportation. And those are the best kind of conversations, because it helps build that bond of familiarity.
That's great. One of the challenges, and this is another question, is how do we come face-to-face with our colleagues when they have such different schedules? And some even have Saturday classes, and I think I'd add to this online classes. How do you do that?
So,
go ahead, Sarah.
So I think that, you know, you have to go where you know you'll find them. So if it's a brick and mortar school, you go to the classroom, wait till the class is over, talk to them. There's also a lot of technology. We're doing things like this Google Hangout. That's a way to bring people who may be online together. Email. Folks check their email very often. If you can get email addresses, that's a good way to get in front of people. But really, we find the best way is class, when they're teaching.
You want to add anything, Sean?
No, I think here, you know, Sarah hit it there. I mean, you just got to be willing to, if it's a Saturday afternoon and you know that there's some people that are teaching on a Saturday afternoon, you're going to want to, like, go by that classroom after they get out, maybe have a conversation. And if you can't really have a conversation then, you know, set up another time, set up a time to meet with them, maybe a cup of coffee, maybe on the university somewhere, in their department, in their office, so you guys can start that dialogue.
And don't forget the phone. The old-fashioned telephone often works as well.
Great.
Text.
So another question: what type of institution of higher education, public, not-for-profit, private-for-profit, online, brick and mortar, have adjuncts been most successful in organizing? Obviously, these categories overlap a little bit, but where has it been successful?
Well, as far as, like, recently the successes that Adjunct Action Network and Adjunct Action campaigns we've been having have been at the nonprofit private universities, mostly out here on the Eastern Seaboard. That's where I've been working mostly. You know, American University a couple years ago. Here in Boston, Tufts, Lesley University, Northeastern. These are all four-year private nonprofit institutions. A few years back, there was a small little Plymouth State University up in New Hampshire, a group of adjuncts who did organize. It was a public school, so the laws were a little different. So, I mean, the success varies, and the success varies on the adjuncts that are there, of the professors who want to make a difference on their campuses and make a difference about what they teach, how they teach, and how they get compensated. So it can vary from school to school, from public, private. Currently, we are reaching out. Adjunct Action Network is reaching out to a lot of the for-profit institutions and starting that dialogue among the professors there. So there's no, like, where you're successful, where you're not. It's as much about the adjuncts that are coming together and want real changes at that institution and want to work together to make those changes. Sarah?
I think what Sean said is right. But it shouldn't discourage you if you're at one of the places that's not where we've seen the most success in the past. Doesn't mean that that's not where we're going to see it in the future. I mean, higher ed is in a crisis. It's in a crisis at the for-profits. It's in a crisis at the public not-for-profits. It's a crisis online. So I think, you know, everything is about the adjuncts who are ready to come together and make things better.
Yeah, and I think that for the network, that's what we're seeing, is that people all over the country often have very similar issues. So can you address adjuncts organizing full-time faculty? Is that happening? How does it work? How is that different?
There is a little difference between the part-time and full-time contingent faculty, like the faculty that have signed maybe a year, a 3 or 4 year contract with the university to teach, you know, X amount of classes for an X amount of dollar amount for that year. Some might have access to benefits. Currently, there is, and I'm sure Seiram, who's going to be here tomorrow, I believe, can go into more detail on the legal aspects of this. But it was the yeshiva decision. It was back in the 80s that put full-time faculty into the governance structure of the university, which I think anybody who is not, even tenured professors, know that there's governance of the faculty to control how and what, and the governance of that university is now limited to a very elite group of administrators, and that's where the, you know, and they're pushing higher ed to be a more of an industry and more for profit. But full-time faculty can organize. Well, you can do it in public sector. They organize in the public sector. There's, you know, plenty of places that are organized where it's both part and full-time professors. And a lot of these private nonprofits where they fall under the NLRB, which again, Seiram will talk more about the process, the legal actual process of organizing and gaining a seat at the table and through collective bargaining. But we are currently working at several universities, like here in the Boston area, and I know in other places in the Midwest and out in California, they are working with full-time contingent faculty to organize. So just like it depends. It depends on if you want to come together and you want to make these certain changes and better, you know, the education at your institution and better your position at that institution. It's all about coming together and having those conversations.
Can I ask you to just explain what you mean by tenured faculty being in the governance structure for people, so that maybe is a little clearer? Sorry.
So,
I know we'll talk about this tomorrow, but if someone's watching today.
Okay.
So,
well, I mean, as far if you look, like the law puts tenured faculty and tenure track faculty as part of this management, as department chairs. They sit on committees within the department itself. They oversee a graduate student's thesis or on the committee for, you know, PhDs and so forth. And the law, the way it is written now, or the way that the decisions have been based on yeshiva, and that was when a group of adjuncts or full-time and part-time professors organized at this private institution, and the university said that the full-time faculty, the tenure track faculty, couldn't because they partook in all of these decision-making within the department, and then therefore the law had classified them as management, which, you know, I mean, it's a whole other, you know, like I said, I'm not a labor lawyer. Sayron will be here tomorrow, and she will discuss more on that aspect. Did that answer?
Yeah, no, that did.
And oftentimes, the governance structure, you know, once you're a tenured professor, it means that you sit on some committee, and that committee can give recommendations on policy, and that's part of the governance structure as well.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, do adjuncts and full-time contingent tend to have similar issues? Do you have maybe advice for adjuncts trying to talk to their full-time colleagues?
I think that there certainly are issues that span across job classifications. Adjuncts and other contingent faculty, whether they're full-time or not, do have similar issues. And so I think, again, those conversations can definitely be had on a one-to-one basis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, there are those issues that transcend from, like, if you're a part-time trying to cobble together a living with 3 or 4 different institutions, or somebody who's working at one institution teaching and everything. There is that contingency. You do not have those kind of job securities, the reappointment process. Even if you have a year-long contract, doesn't necessarily say at the end of that academic year you're going to get reappointed, which is the same thing for right now currently across this country. There are adjuncts that are teaching this fall semester, and they don't know how they're going to pay their bills come January of 2015 because they haven't gotten reappointed, or, you know, they're waiting for that class, or trying to get a, you know, sending their resumes to this university saying, I teach that subject, I'm published in that subject matter, but there's just that contingency of not knowing where and how that you're going to be able to pay your bills, because it really comes down to, how do I make a living? How do I do what I want to do and love to do, which is teach, but then have to worry about all these other things just to make a living.
Mm-hmm. And to add on to that, you know, folks get into this profession because they love what they do, they love to teach, but that they love the students. And so it's also about, you know, how can we make sure that the students are getting the most out of this experience as well. And oftentimes, folks who are contingent by nature struggle with, how do I make enough time for my students, where do I meet with my students, and students is one of the things that brings everybody together in a university system.
And that actually brings up another good question that I had myself, is that, what about talking to students and full-time faculty? I know a lot of adjuncts worry about their students and how their students will be affected, but how do you talk to them about this?
So I think a lot of our campaigns, especially in the Boston area and out in Seattle, have been successful because they've had a huge student support group. Whether it's come from different folks on campus, different student groups have come together to support adjunct organizing for the very same reasons we just talked about. So I think it's a crucial part of the campaign. I mean, I know that some adjuncts, when they first get their class, they say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm an adjunct professor. It means I don't have an office. It means that I don't have office hours. And some other people feel less comfortable about talking about it. But I think students don't realize when they have a professor who's an adjunct and who's not. So I think that these are very important discussions to be had.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What about full-time colleagues, full-time tenured colleagues? What do you say to your full-time tenured colleagues?
Well, one of the main things that's been coming across lately with the full-time faculty is they are seeing the shift of this crisis in higher education. There is definitely a crisis here, and, you know, I mean, tenure is not a guaranteed anymore. A lot of these universities want to get rid of it. So I think when they see what the adjuncts are trying to do to, you know, to put the mission back into higher ed, especially in the private nonprofits. So, I mean, the mission is education. It's not to make money. It's not to have 12 different rock climbing walls and all that stuff. It's about educating people. It's about an exchange of ideas. And I think with a lot of the full-time faculty, the tenured faculty we've talked to at different universities, they see that. They see that there is a need to reform higher education, to get back to what its primary mission is, and that is to teach.
Right. That's it. So we find actually that full-time faculty are supportive in a lot of schools. Is that what we found in the Boston area?
Yes, yeah, we've definitely found that in the Boston area. I know with some of the campaigns I was involved in the DC metro area, the same story is the full-time faculty see that there is a need for reform in higher ed. And I think it comes down to is like it all goes back to, like Sarah mentioned, it all goes back to the students, and it's like what an adjunct told me: my working conditions are my students' learning conditions. If you're worried about all this other stuff that you have to do, and all you really want to do is teach and make a living at teaching because this is what you've chosen your profession to be, but it's really hard to do that when you can't meet with students, you don't have an office, you don't have office hours, or you have to run off, and you're only compensated for that time that you are teaching. It doesn't compensate you for all the other things that are involved with somebody who's a professor at an institute of higher learning.
So we had another question come in, which I think is one that probably a lot of people think about. What is the commitment, the time commitment when you choose to organize like this? I know, the question asked, and I think this is true for a lot of people, if you're teaching in more than one school, or you're teaching and you're holding another job, you have childcare responsibilities, how do you find time to organize, to try to bring your colleagues together?
I think that adjuncts and everybody have busy set schedules for all the reasons that you just mentioned, but I think it's about how do you just work it into your day-to-day activities. If you're teaching, it may mean that you come to campus 10 or 15 minutes early to talk to somebody who's teaching in a classroom next to you, or it might mean that you stay a couple hours or a couple minutes late to talk to someone who's getting out after your class gets out. There is time commitment. It takes time to have these conversations, but it's sort of like many hands make for light work. You talk to somebody and they feel the same way as you, and they're ready to talk to folks as well. So everyone has to start somewhere, and then you go from there.
Mm-hmm. And Sean, I think you used the example of meeting adjuncts at your daughter's school, but sometimes you run into people in other places.
Yeah, I mean, and you can definitely have those conversations anywhere. And, it's how much, like I think Sarah hit it. How much time can you commit to it? What are you willing, or what can you be willing to commit to those, that time frame? And you might run into colleagues that you don't know could be teaching. You might be teaching in English in a writing program, and 3 doors down could be a anthropologist adjunct, and you just never connected, but you might connect through other social circles in your neighborhood, in your kids' schools, all other kinds of places. But it's just like you're a group of adjuncts coming together are only going to be as strong as how much they're committed to do that. If anybody just put in an hour, well, if that's all you have to give, that's all you have to give. But everybody has to be willing and be strong together to to move forward, to gain what you want to change, to gain a seat at the table when you're talking to the administration about your working conditions and your working environment.
Yeah.
And there's a place for everybody in the union. So whether it's talking to your coworkers, which definitely has to happen, or whether it's helping to write a letter of support or whatever, or make a phone call. There's plenty of ways to get in touch with other people. And whether you have an hour or a day, there's ways to make those connections. Public transportation is another good way to find your coworkers. There's a lot of people shuffling from school to school.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, Sean and Sarah, for doing this. We've got to wrap up, and thank you to everyone for joining us today and making time to chat. Just a quick reminder, the Adjunct Action Network is member-driven, and if you want to see change in higher education, one of the ways to begin to do that is to join the Action Network. And I hope that we all, hope that we see you all tomorrow to talk about the legal issues. Thanks again. Bye-bye.